Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Dave Tree.
It's not true. That's impossible.
Here, ask your questions.
All right.
Talk about fan expectations and if and how that factored into the development and writing process at all.
I come to Star Wars, period, as a fan first, and I certainly came to the new trilogy as a fan. I mean, I saw The Force Awakens on 68th Street in New York just with a regular audience on opening day, and then saw it twice more, once on IMAX. So I am not easy on these films. Like, I come into them as a little bit of a contrarian, sort of sitting like this and being like, okay, impress me, go on. So Michelle also is a tough viewer of films.
Yeah.
Like, we're pretty tough on all films. So from that point of view, we naturally had, the fan was the mole in the room, right? Because I already was there, and there are things that maybe I agreed with or didn't agree with in other Star Wars movies, and I came in with my own axes to grind about why did they do this or why did they do that. But and of course we listen to the conversation around all the films, and you go crazy pretty quickly if you start Googling because you're so afraid that people are,
But we have our own spirited debates like that, right?
Right.
We recognize we're always, we don't leave any stone we did not unturned on this, and we had a lot of conversation, debate, our own expectations as well as fan expectations. We all of it is important, but at the end of the day, the most important thing, and I think what resonates with the fans most, is to tell an authentic story. JJ, I think, bearing the burden of all of that, I think to him too, it's about these characters and doing that justice, creating this sense of synthesis for not only the trilogy but the 9 movies, and that is the greater job at hand, while also telling one pure story that, you go in and can have a sense of inevitability and surprise and thrilling and funny and all of those things. So it's all important. It really is.
And Star Wars fans I'm a little biased as a Star Wars fan, but I like to think we're really smart. So nothing will get by. Yeah. You think nothing is going to get by the fans, but also nothing is wasted. So anything that you put in that is worth thinking about or arguing about or reflecting on or being moved by or being angry about is something that is going to be caught. It's not a movie where you think these are cast not your pearls before swine. Like, every one of those pearls is going to be picked up by the fans, because the fans obviously cherish all the things that are great about Star Wars.
It's so rewarding, for all of the crew members and artists and, across the movie, because all of their detail and love that they put into it, the fans, like you're saying, appreciate, get the story resonance, instantly. That's very rewarding.
And that was another thing, in that in doing a film like this, which is a 9th part, that the fans all know every word pretty much. And so if there's and something that a quote that we talked about a bunch, which is, I think, misattributed to Mark Twain, which he may or may not have said, is history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And we thought there need to be, in this movie, as the culmination, we need to see things that almost feel cyclical, like things that we've seen before. There are going to be moments that allude to other moments. There are going to be words that, we know what resonance a word contains for a Star Wars fan, because we know every word, right, of the original trilogy, certainly, and even the prequel and new trilogies. And so you're working on a whole other communication level, because you're not only communicating within the story, but you're communicating at a meta level on the rhyme of the narrative rhyme throughout the 9 movies.
How do you balance that with also, because the first movie was over 40 years ago, it was a different world. How do you balance that, being faithful to the spirit of the movies, but also incorporating, the world of today?
Well, something that Kathy said a couple of weeks ago is that when we were having a debate over a certain word that was going to be either in the film or not, is it needs to feel timeless, right? And there are even certain words as a writer that you think sound too modern to your ear, which is crazy because it was a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. But every now and then you'll come across a word that says that doesn't feel Star Warsy. Yeah. And I don't know whether the test is, does it sound like something that could have come out of like a World War II Spitfire movie when you're in the pilots, or does it sound like something that could have come out of Flash Gordon? But somehow there's a Star Warsiness to even the tone that has to feel of that galaxy, and so timelessness, I think, is part of it. That even though it was 42 years ago, like even the way that people speak in Star Wars 42 years ago sounds totally modern to my ear, and maybe that's because we've started to talk more like Star Wars, or because Star Wars was anticipating how we talk. But chicken or the egg, it feels modern, and so we could, I think, be true to modernity, but also using the tone of 42 years ago.
And I think as a result of that, those timeless stories reveal even more levels over time and over generations. That is another test that you don't know, but you put forth what feels authentic and true to you and to the characters that are experiencing, that conflict at that time. But yeah, I think timeless is an excellent word, that we hope to live up to, because that is very much in the DNA of Star Wars.
Speaking to that timeless nature of these films, like this Skywalker saga has gone on for 40 years, like on a personal level, how do you guys feel about really being the ones to kind of end this and close out that story?
It is hard to let go. It really is. It was, you were speaking earlier, it was so moving, about writing those final words, and it is a feeling of joy, but also it's bittersweet, of letting go of something that has been such a massive legacy and so important to so many people, so important to us.
Because we thought it was over in 1983, right? Ewok Celebration, it's over. And then the prequels say, oh, you get to look into this world one more time. And then when the sequel trilogy happened, I thought, I'm going to get to see, when I saw the first trailer to The Force Awakens, I thought, oh my God, a wrecked Star Destroyer, of course. I didn't know I needed to see that, but I needed to see that. But now that the Skywalker saga is ending, I don't want to live in a world without the Skywalker saga. And that's why every day when we went to work, we just thought we have to try to get as much out of every moment as we could, like, genuinely. Like we never went. I was just saying, like, this was never treated as a job. It was like, it was our lives. It was, 2:45 a.m. Michelle would say, oh my God, I think I have an idea for this, or, go home and say, I don't think we quite got this right, or should we think of a different word for this military maneuver that we're going to talk about in the scene tomorrow, or it was just totalizing, because Star Wars, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why we love Star Wars so much, is because it is totalizing. Like, who wants to live in this, like, dreary world of ours, right? you go into Star Wars and you can just look in 360 degrees anywhere around you, and the world is inhabited and feels real. And so we were living in that, for 2.5 years, and I wish it didn't end.
Yeah.
We talk about this as the Skywalker saga, these 9 films, and especially in this last trilogy, there's been a question on who's the Skywalker. I think in a lot of ways, for me, Kylo's the Skywalker. We don't talk about it much, but as lineage goes, he's the Skywalker. Right.
Yeah.
And so, is that something that is kept in mind, or when we talk about it as the Skywalker saga, does that encompass more of Luke and Leia than the older generation of Skywalker?
Well, the film will reveal those things, but I promise you that whenever we talked about Ren, we talked about him as the former Ben Solo. We talked about him as, the protege of Snoke. We talked about him as the once protege of Luke. We talked about him as the Prince of Alderaan. We talked about him as all the richness that he is coming from, the lineage of Han and Leia. So I hope do justice to the fact that he's a complicated character with a rich lineage.
And that legacy, both in terms of the big picture Star Wars, but for these characters in this story, it is a part of the story. It is their history. It is our history. It is something that feels authentically true. That is informing their everything. The way they think about themselves, the way they discover themselves, their own choices. How they are going to bear the burden of the conflict ahead, and will they be able to rise up, to the challenge, to what the generation before them, was able to achieve. It's all part of the fabric of the movie.
Hello, I'm Ahmed Best, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
When you guys were approaching, anytime you had an empty page or a scenario, were you seeing what you wanted to do visually, or were you hearing it auditorially? And does JJ's ability to deliver strong visuals in anything you want, does it free you in a way to say, okay, here's our concept, but we can go this way with it wide, so let the dogs live?
It's both, but that's a really good question, because there are certain scenes where we thought the rhythm of this is like Larry Kasdan's rhythm. It's like, it's the Empire Strikes Back tunnel, that's the rhythm of it, and then that would sort of define how we approach the scene. And then there were other things that were just, it was a visual feeling. And then JJ, of course, worked in close collaboration with Rick Carter, one of our production designers, and Kevin Jenkins, who's the greatest Star Wars fan of all, who could draw you any vehicle from memory, with astonishing detail, and has worked on Rogue One and all the new
Force Awakens as well.
Trilogy. So sometimes they would just have a visual idea, and then they'd come to us, and based on that visual idea, we would get really inspired. I mean, there are things in the third act in particular that I could think of that were really the seed of it were concept paintings that we'd come into the war room, which even within the fortress, within the fortress, there was a room that was only a few of us had the magic card that could get in. But on the walls were concept paintings, which eventually will be in the book, I think, the Art of Red Skywalker book. But and that you could just go in there and get inspired. Whenever I felt exhausted or I didn't have any more ideas, you'd go in there and just be surrounded by these images.
Yeah, I'd often be looking for Chris, and he was in the art room. I'll get him. It's true, because it's so inspiring, and these are great storytellers in their own right, and so JJ, I think, loves working that way. He loves being inspired by that, by other people and what they do great, and he just tries to bring all of the greatest ideas in, to realize his vision, to tell a great story. So it comes from all of those things.
And you can see it in JJ's eyes when he walks into the room and he sees something that inspires him. It's like he can't help it; his hands start shaking, and he starts
it's like a vibration.
I'm sorry. When you talk about inspiration, over these 9 films, what would you say is the thing that kind of centers you and your inspiration about Star Wars? Is there a moment? Is there a movie? Is there a theme? Something that just always brings you back home?
Yeah,
that's a great.
That's a writer question. So I mean, a question from a writer, because you're talking about things that we and Michelle in many ways was a writer on this film. So we're all writers, but it's redemption. The idea of redemption is super important to Star Wars. The idea that there is such thing as light even in the darkest times. The idea of defiance always would get me when I would think about Leia standing up to Vader in that first scene. Or she's about 4'11", standing up against the almost literal Grim Reaper and telling him, I only you could be so bold. She tells off Vader in the first scene, and so there's a sense of defiance against tyranny that we could always go back to in our hearts and minds. And then, of course, just the story of a story of sacrifice and the Vader sacrificing himself for his son. Whenever we'd go back to those themes, or the separation of the twins, at the end of the prequels, the tragedy of the separation of the twins, and that this almost fairy tale idea that one would grow up as a princess and one would grow up as a farmer, that whenever we'd get lost in the vast scale of it, we'd just go back and say, those are the things that make Star Wars, and that make us love Star Wars.
Great answer.
You guys famously came in to take over from another writer and director who'd already started work on this film. If there's any way that you can tell us if you started from scratch entirely, or if you took a look at what Colin Trevorrow had already started to do and built off of that structure.
Well, being a little bit superstitious, I didn't want to read the previous stuff before, because a lot of times it's hard to go in your own direction if you have other stuff in your head, and if I read even a newspaper article, probably that wording will come out of me later on in the day, because I think I'm it's just the way my brain works. So I didn't actually look at that stuff, and we started from we started from scratch. We started, with a blank page and literally just started writing down things that we thought would be interesting to see, or moments that we loved from the original trilogy, or would write words like underdog on the board and say, okay, who are the underdogs in Return of the Jedi? Obviously, the rebels are underestimated. The Ewoks are underestimated, because how could this primitive tribe of teddy bears ever, destroy the greatest military power? Is Vader an underdog when he's with the Emperor? And we just think about all these things and say how that's a feeling that we love from the originals, and how could we recreate that in our story? So it would be, the conversations would just go in any direction, but we just start with an idea and a feeling, and then try to flesh it out in a story.
Yes, from a blank whiteboard. One of the greatest things that JJ did, I remember in one of our first story meetings on 7 and again on 9, is he just wanted us to be talking about what we want to be feeling, what do we want to feel. And it comes back to that, to your question earlier about the compass, the thing that you come back to, and some of those answers really in moments of, Dark Night of the Soul moment, you're like, okay, this is what we want to feel. This is what the essence of the story is about. This is the thing we need to keep reinforcing. And it always then would the light would emerge, and it would reveal the next, level of the story, or the right decision made in the scene, or the right dialogue. So it was, it was incredible challenge, because we had lost some time, and for JJ to step in under a lot more pressure with a pressurized schedule. He and Chris had to jump in immediately. So with starting over and with a blank page, but in a way it was, you go back to the purest place because of that, and you just listen to your heart and your gut, and that's where it all kind of. And
it helped that I really liked Rey and was moved by Rey, even from like Leia's defining scene, right? The first time you meet Rey, there's a droid that's in trouble, and Rey has the compassion to free him in a fierce way, or almost the first time after you see her scavenging, but and then she makes this very moral decision not to sell BB-8, to Unkar, and that for me immediately I just bonded with her, and I thought, okay, I can do business with this character. Like she's someone that I want to be with and know more about, and so we and thank God we have that in Finn and Poe and Rey, and and I think in Rose and in Janna and in Zori, I think they're all people that I like and would want to be friends with, kind of, or I would hope would deign to be friends with me. So in that way, coming back to the characters always centered us.
Always.
Chris, when you picked up your Writers Guild Award for Argo, you made a comment that screenwriting is the loneliest profession, and you said having your guild card made you feel like you were part of something. Did any part of this...
Oh, thank you for watching that YouTube video. Did I look like crazy in that moment?
It was nice. It was good to see that freshness. Yeah.
I'm Anthony Daniels, and you are listening to Fantha Tracks. Well done.
Did any part of this feel lonely in that way? And what's it like now being part of this group? Part of this legacy, the iconic Star Wars series.
I mean, there are moments, of course, when you feel lonely when you're writing, because you have to be alone with the characters. But I have to say that this really changed my life in the best ways, because I had never really been, in a way, like fiction and reality were mirroring each other, because Rey and Finn and Poe had never really been part of a group, and I had never really been part of a group like Michelle and JJ and Kathy, and we embarked on this like as part of a group, and we were all like Star Wars nerds, and of course Kevin and Rick and the designers, like it's like finally I found my tribe, and I could go to work every day and feel like, oh, these people will get my references and they'll know what I'm talking about, and so like the movie is, I think you'll find, very much about friendship and about the like finding your tribe and finding your family. And I know it sounds cheesy, but I actually mean it sincerely. And I'm usually the most like ornery, like cynical person in the world. So for me to, what it takes for me to say that. It robs me of my cynicism guild card.
No, and I mean that is one of the hardest things about ending this, is that we don't, we won't be kind of, immersed in this every day together, and that is always the thing you miss. But in this case, we really, the alchemy of this team, of this group, is pretty remarkable. and we all, we adore each other, and we root for each other, and we fight with each other in the greatest way, like this most spirited debates, because we care so much. It's all, it is all part of that, being part of that tribe together in this together. And I know I'm already missing that. Every phase you're excited to move into the next one, but you're kind of mourning the last one because you're like, oh my God.
It's like we don't have group text going anymore. We would have constant, for literally 2.5 years, we'd have group text of me and Michelle and JJ, and we would just be like does this word sound right to your ear? Like, propose it to group, and then if you heard silence, you'd be like, okay, it's a bad idea. Hey, did you guys get my text about that droid idea? Then silence.
The previous film, as you said, the fans are very passionate. Not everybody is, agrees with the. So I was wondering if you had to follow the steps planted on that, or if you could divert a little bit,
Well, JJ naturally has really strong inclinations and ideas about where he wants things to go, and so I think any director taking over wouldn't necessarily walk exactly in the footsteps that were given at the end of episode 8. There were things from episode 8 that were turned out to be super useful to us that we didn't even realize at first. It wasn't until we got deeply immersed in it that we thought, oh, there's that interesting hanging thread from 8 that we could pick up. But also, JJ is the filmmaker who made 7, and JJ planted certain threads in 7 because that's where his imagination and his interests lay. And so there may have been things in 7 that maybe Ryan wasn't as interested in naturally as JJ would have been, having been the filmmaker for 7. So there were also opportunities to go back and pick up certain storylines that maybe didn't interest Ryan as much as they did JJ, and that's been really fun to get to dig a little into some of the Force Awakens stuff. That's one example. Yes, for sure, for sure. And one of the things about Star Wars is they want filmmakers with an original voice. And so if the Knights of Ren just weren't something that Ryan wanted to take up, great. But JJ, of course, having created them, was more interested in them, and so we got to take them up again in 9, and so on, with a few different storylines.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Thank you.
Did you have any trouble, which character, from a writer's perspective, because I've heard writers talk about wrestling a character down and trying to figure out who they were and gives them the most kind of buck as they're telling the story. Was there any characters like that? Attacking it from the end of the story, trying to figure them out and bring to a conclusion all of it?
The hardest challenge, I would say, for, as writers for JJ and Chris, is balancing all of those arcs, not only for the, original trilogy characters, the sort of larger saga characters, some of which may or may not see in this movie, and of course the new generation, and the new characters we meet in this movie. So that was a phenomenal amount of work that these guys did to give each and every character, human, creature, droid, a story, a real story, that had real meaning, is one of the things I'm proudest of in the entire movie.
Well, we had such good actors that we knew that we were going to have to face them on set, and you don't want to, right? You don't want to look at Billy D. Williams and say, oh, well, we didn't really, you don't really have much to do, but here you go. Or you don't want to look similarly at the new actors like Richard D. Grant or Naomi Ackie or really any. I chose them at random, but you don't want to look any of these actors in the eye and say that you don't have much to play here. So that kept us going back to the drawing board to try to find more interesting stuff for everybody to do, and then to be inspired by their chemistry. I'm not even sure if the actors realized how much we would watch the dailies and lean forward and get ideas and think, oh my God, this combination. It's like doing a choreography thing where, different dance partners come together at different times, and you might see that these two seem to have real chemistry, and that would affect the ongoing writing of the script, and we'd go back and say,
we have to give them another scene, or we have to make this change because of how good this is over here. That's the thrilling part of making a movie. It's just that it's a living process like that, and that JJ in particular is so. I think he's very inspired by that feeling of discovery. So we're constantly in conversation about it.
Last question.
This is Steve Bloom, voice of Zeb Aurelius, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. Caravast. May the force be with you.
Just regarding how you've managed to make Carrie come back and be a central character. obviously her dialogue is already there.
Right.
Like that's
right.
Like I would imagine there's only so much you can do. So, in terms of how that fit into your script,
yeah.
Like, did it just fall nicely into your puzzle, or?
Well, we had to sort of reverse engineer it. Yeah, it's every scene with Carrie was written around Carrie. So we would take what we knew we had, the moments with her, and some of them are I think, memorable lines that had been left, in episode 7. But we would take the scenes with her and then just make everything work around that, and which is a really interesting exercise as a screenwriter, because you have not only do you have to have the lines sort of fit, but also Carrie's intention as an actor. If she had, and she has a couple of lines in this movie, a few lines that I think are the old witty, sparkly Carrie, right? And if that's the tone in which she was delivering something, you had to create a scene that would allow her to be in that tone. Or she has scenes of great, consequence and gravity in this. And so similarly, we had to create moments where that we could stay true to that. And and we were really, Carrie's daughter, Billy Lord, is of course in this film, and Billy's written about this. Billy, we spoke to her about this and about the legacy of her mom and all that kind of thing. And we were really protective of making sure that all the scenes with Carrie didn't feel shoehorned in, but that they were sort of native to the environment that she was in. And of course, JJ, having been the co-writer on Force Awakens, naturally his writing rhythms would fit in with the writing rhythms that he and Larry had established in Force Awakens. And so it took the first few months, that was our main focus. It was how do we get Leia in this film? That was our only focus. And how do we take these moments that we love with Leia and get them into this film? And then everything grew around that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you guys, it was really fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you want to get in touch with Fantha Tracks, this is how you do it. You can drop us an email, radio@fanthatracks.com, or you can comment on our Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Tumblr, any of our social media feeds @Fantha Tracks. If you want to listen to the show, you can tune in on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, listen to us on Stitcher, subscribe on Android, listen to us on Spotify, on SoundCloud, subscribe on TuneIn, listen to iHeartRadio, or even on Spreaker. We're on smart speakers such as Amazon Alexa, Apple HomePod, Google Home and Sonos. We're also available in your car, if you've got a car or an handspeeder, with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, or on your gaming consoles and your television. You can find us on Fantha Tracks TV. You can get the Fantha Tracks app, can't recommend that highly enough, available on all platforms. And for any details on how to listen in or subscribe, head to the Fantha Tracks radio landing page on fanthatracks.com.